Continuing now with The Final Days by Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein. And when we ended the last session, we had just finished reading through Tuesday, August 6th. So now we move on to Wednesday, August 7th. On this morning, Alexander Haig felt the burden of government acutely. His job was to prevent a rout. Haig wanted to smooth the way for the country, for the president, and for himself. He could see, hear, and feel the erosion. Everything was crumbling at once. This was the last dismal stage of the battle, a defeat of dimensions such as he had never experienced. He had read about defeat. This was what it was: noise, irrationality, collapse on all sides. The completeness seemed so unexpected. Then, in calmer moments, it seemed clear and inevitable. The Hill, the press, traditional Nixon supporters, members of the White House staff, even old friends, Haig was sure he could deal with them. He was not sure he could deal with Nixon. He was afraid the president might kill himself. Over the past months, there had been certain references to death and suicide. At first, they were oblique and often expressed in Nixon's impatient manner. The president was thinking out loud, probably. This week, Nixon had finally approached the subject head on. The two men had been alone. "You fellows in your business," the president began, meaning the Army, which he always seemed to consider Haig's real business. "You have a way of handling problems like this. Somebody leaves a pistol in the drawer." Haig waited. "I don't have a pistol," the president said sadly, as if it were one more deprivation in a long history of underprivilege, as if he were half asking to be given one. It was the same tone he used when he talked about his parents not having had any money. Afterward, Haig called the president's doctors. He ordered that all pills be denied the president and that the sleeping pills and tranquilizers he already had be taken away. Haig also discussed the matter with Bizart. At first, Haig was vague. He mentioned pills. It was not necessarily a question of suicide. Pills might interfere with decisions the president had to make and follow through on. Pills must not be available to act as a shield against reality. Then Haig told Bizart he was taking every possible precaution to make sure that Watergate did not end in a presidential suicide. The president might see it as the only way to spare himself and the country the pain of more recrimination. So Haig had taken steps to make sure the president did not have the means to kill himself. The president wasn't the type, Bizart responded. Nixon had weathered adversities. The tougher things got, the tougher he seemed to get. And Bizart was convinced that Nixon was a very religious man deep down. Religious men don't kill themselves. Not true. Haig said the president was a battered man, strained to his limit. That was personal on my part to say not true. I've known three Baptist pastors who I believe to be very, all friends of mine, who I believe to be very sincere in their faith, and they killed themselves. Depression is an ugly thing. Haig said the president was a battered man, strained to his limit. He compared Nixon's behavior to that of Captain Queeg, the erratic naval officer in the Caine Mutiny. Queeg had been relieved of duty by his second-in-command because he was unable to function as his ship swirled out of control in a typhoon. Bizart thought the analogy argued against a suicide. Queeg was a fighter. He had fought to the end. Haig and Bizart talked about their experiences with Nixon. Haig was concerned that he didn't really know the president and had never felt close to him. Nixon was so private. Haig wondered sometimes what Nixon did when he was alone, because he spent so many hours that way. Bizart said he felt the same overwhelming distance, but he thought he had been given a glimpse of the man that no other person had. Haig knew what Bizart was referring to. After the secret taping system had been revealed, and they had to contend with the two missing tapes and the missing dictabelt of April, Nixon had delivered some other dictabelts to Bizart, recordings of his daily reflections. Perhaps they would allay his lawyer's suspicions, Nixon implied. When he'd heard them, Bizart recognized that they were clearly not meant for anyone else's ears. Nixon hadn't even let Rose Woods transcribe them. Some of them were under subpoena, but Bizart had argued to Judge Sirica that they were too personal to be released. Sirica had listened to one, had agreed, and had told the special prosecutor that they were not relevant to any investigation. From those recordings, sometimes they were small cassettes, Bizart believed he had heard Nixon with his defenses peeled away. It was rare for a man in such a public position to keep so truthful a diary, Bizart told Haig. Normally, the diaries of public men serve to provide a cover story for history. The Nixon dictations were a stark contrast. Bizart said that his own most emotional moments in all of Watergate had come as he listened to the president reveal his emotions. The tapes provided a dark, almost Dostoevskian journey into Nixon's fears, obsessions, hostilities, passions, and inadequacies. Bizart, who had spent years consulting doctors about his mother's mental illness, felt that the dictating sessions were genuine therapy for Nixon. The lawyer would not reveal any details, even to Haig. He would say only that Nixon had talked out of his real feelings, and oddly he would discourse on everyday occurrences: the weather, the flowers in the White House garden, birds. One thing was clear, Bizart said. The president thought he had to submerge his true feelings at any cost. At a young age, he had decided that he would have to keep his real emotions suppressed and expose only calculated emotions. He was convinced that was what others wanted. Sadly enough, Nixon's instincts were often finer than his calculations. The president had a secret life of sorts, material for a psychological novel, Bizart said. He had compassion. He had talked about John Dean. Dean should not be judged harshly because he was a young man who was in over his head, Nixon had said. The president was an introvert by nature. He had talked into his machine about his reactions to meeting people and campaigning. He hated it all, but he did it anyway, and thrust forward an outer shell. No one could get through. Close relationships were impossible. His relationship with his wife was totally formalized. Even with his daughter Julie, he had rarely revealed his emotions. He played the strong, consoling father when what he really wanted was to reach out and be consoled. But Bizart was certain that the exterior was still solid and that it would hold. Haig was not inclined to linger over such analyses. He turned impatiently to the operational problems before him. He had to continue laying the foundation for resignation as quietly as possible. Most immediately, there was Goldwater's request to see the president with a message from the Republican leadership. The message was resignation. He had to head that off at all costs, and he had to do it himself. He had to see Goldwater personally, but not at the White House. There was too much rumor already. The Hill was also impossible. Haig talked to Birch, who told him Goldwater had already accepted an invitation to lunch at his home. It was decided that Haig should join them. Goldwater spent the morning in his large apartment on Cathedral Avenue, surrounded with his ham radio equipment and model cars. Birch called to set the time, 12:30, and tell him that Haig would be there. "Are you going to wear a suit?" Birch asked. Goldwater generally showed up at his house in Levi's and cowboy boots. "Shit, what do you expect me to wear?" Goldwater responded. It was a serious occasion. Then Birch told him that the president would see him that afternoon about 4 o'clock. Meanwhile, Haig went to see the president and discussed the upcoming meeting in terms of giving Goldwater an opportunity to tell the president about his chances in the Senate. The president said he wanted a broader picture and decided that Rhodes and Scott would come along as well. Haig left. This is interesting information for me. For one thing, my memory, which obviously is not perfect, had always said that meeting took place on Tuesday, and here we are on Wednesday now. And also, I remember a picture of Goldwater, Rhodes, and Scott, I think coming from the White House after their meeting with the president. But this is new information for me that it was the president who decided that Rhodes and Scott should come with Goldwater. So the president said he wanted a broader picture than just the Senate. And so he decided that Rhodes and Scott would come along as well. Of course, Scott was from the Senate. Rhodes was from the House. Haig left. It was too late to meet personally with Scott and Rhodes. He asked Timmons to invite them to the 4 o'clock meeting and to brief them. Timmons, too, thought congressional pressure might push Nixon backward. If the leaders were simply to tell the president that the situation was hopeless, they could all live comfortably with themselves. No one, Timmons believed, including himself, should take responsibility for any more. Nixon would do what he wanted to do in spite of everyone. That was what he had always done. At 1:15, Timmons arrived at Scott's office. The senator was eating lunch. Timmons told him the president had asked personally to see the two minority leaders as well as Goldwater. Scott was flattered. He thought it appropriate. The president has been up and down on resignation, Timmons explained. The family wants him to stay on. We just don't know exactly what will happen. It looks like he'll resign, but while I'm talking, he could change his mind. He said bluntly that a demand for resignation would increase the president's resistance, and Scott promised to tread lightly. Timmons was less frank with Rhodes. The president wants to talk to you and to Hugh Scott and Barry Goldwater, he began. Well, what about? Rhodes asked. He's thinking about making a decision and wants to know exactly what his situation on the floor of the House and the Senate is before he makes it. Well, Bill, does this decision encompass the possibility of resignation? Rhodes asked. Yes, it does, Timmons said. He told Rhodes the meeting was set for 4 o'clock at the White House. Haig wanted to underscore the strategy to Scott. He put his grievances aside for the moment and called him. Hugh, he said, he has almost been persuaded several times. The problem now is the family. If you demand his resignation, he'll probably harden up again. Would you just tell him the situation? He knows it, but he needs to hear it from you. He needs to know there are no alternatives, nothing else. Scott agreed. Bob Haldeman stepped briskly along the pavement a few blocks from the White House. He went into the Bowen building at 815 15th Street Northwest and took the elevator to the 6th floor. He was worried and wanted to review the situation with one of his attorneys, Frank Strickler. Haldeman had reached the president by phone the day before, but the question of pardons, though implicit, had not been directly discussed. Strickler came to the point. If Haldeman wanted a pardon, he had better get a specific request to the president quickly. A personal appeal might be the only way. For 10 days, both Haldeman and Strickler had known that a new crisis was building. Haig had called Haldeman soon after the Supreme Court decision to ask him what he recalled of the 3 conversations he had had with the president on June 23, 1972. Haig had been very concerned and had asked a lot of questions. What was the context of the conversations? What went on before and after each discussion? Haldeman wouldn't help. He couldn't remember much, had blocked most of it out of his mind, and on Strickler's advice didn't bother to recall any more. When Haldeman hung up, he was sure that Haig had been saying that the president might not be able to remain in office once the tapes were disclosed. Now Haldeman told Strickler he was sure the end was imminent. Haig and the lawyers were panicking. The importance of those transcripts was being vastly overplayed. The president had revealed worse and had withstood it. Nixon was the victim of a punch. Nixon was the victim of a putsch, P-U-T-S-C-H. That's what Hitler had engineered to take power in Germany. Was the victim of a putsch in his own White House, Haldeman thought. Strickler suggested that Haldeman get his justification for a pardon down on paper. Haldeman agreed. He needed to collect his own thoughts, and he knew that the president preferred to deal with formal proposals. On a personal basis, he began writing, better to close the chapter now than to have to sit by helplessly for the next several years and watch trials and appeals. Historically, would be far better to grant the pardon and close the door to such process than to let it run and have the trials become a surrogate impeachment. Also, history will look kindly on loyalty and compassion to subordinates caught in the web. Solves problem of potential prosecutor access to files and tapes by eliminating basis for further prosecution. Also solves problem of defense forcing access to files. The only way to wipe the slate clean is to shut down the prosecution totally. As long as it is there, there's a possibility of other new things. To avoid trauma of country, injustice to defendants, personal problems to RN, adverse historical effects, all point to necessity of overall pardon. Haldeman tried to get through by phone to Nixon, failed, and finally reached Haig. He quickly stated his request and outlined his reasons. Haig was appalled. He knew a threat when he heard one. Haldeman was talking about loyalty, about avoiding a trauma, personal problems for the president, and adverse historical effects. To Haig, it sounded as if Haldeman was warning that he would send Nixon to jail if he didn't get a pardon. Haig suppressed his anger and was again merely unencouraging. He didn't want to think about it, and he didn't want the president to have to think about it. The timetable for resignation was at least tentatively set, and this sort of thing could upset it. Nonetheless, Haig promised Haldeman that the request would get full consideration. The general was sensitive about Watergate conspirators asking for executive clemency. A crucial element in the first Watergate cover-up had been Howard Hunt's demands for clemency in exchange for silence. Now someone was trying to blackmail the White House again. Nightmare visions of new cover-ups and obstructions of justice presented themselves, and he saw himself getting tangled up in them this time. Before he could ask for advice from the lawyers, Haig had to leave for Birch's house to meet Goldwater. The senator was already there when he arrived. Goldwater was shocked at Haig's appearance. The general's face was drawn and pale. He looked older, thinner, beaten physically and mentally. "You look like death warmed over," Goldwater told him. "You should get out into the country." He offered his place as a retreat. Haig said he'd been up for 4 straight days and nights. Goldwater figured that there was only one person who could keep Haig up 4 nights. That meant that the president had been sleepless, no condition in which to make decisions. He asked how the president was holding up physically and mentally. "Fine," Haig said. Birch nodded. Bullshit, Goldwater thought, but he decided to stick to business. The 3 men sat down to a lunch of fruit and mixed seafood. Goldwater reported what many of the Senate Republicans had said at the GOP policy lunch the day before. No chance in the Senate, he summarized, adding that he himself was prepared to vote to convict on Article 2, the abuse of power charge. "You know he'll tell you to shove it up your ass," Birch said of any attempt Goldwater might make to explain his position to the president. "We don't need any more pushing him," Haig said. "We've had enough of that." He went through his stand and drill. He went through his standard drill. Some of the family were the major obstacles. They had been fiercely opposed to resignation. It was going to be dreadful when the family realized he had lied to them, Goldwater said. That would be hard on them and on him. Haig suggested that some members of the family were no longer resisting resignation. The 2 sons-in-law seemed to understand what had happened and what was happening now. The president was weighing his options, whether to stand trial and face certain defeat in the Senate or to resign in the best interest of himself and the country. It was 90% certain that the president would resign, Haig said, but a sudden rapid spasm of the old Nixon still could change that. But a sudden rapid spasm of the old Nixon will could change that. And the president would not permit Congress or the Republican leaders to dictate his decision. To even appear to be trying to force his hand could prove fatal, Haig explained. The problem was to keep Nixon on track. Goldwater saw the link between Griffin's inflammatory call for resignation on Monday and this lunch. Haig was quelling the fires. The general laid out the scenario. Goldwater would not be going alone. Scott and Rhodes would join him. The idea was to show the president how hopeless his situation was. Nothing more, nothing less. "Don't even mention the word resignation," Haig insisted. Goldwater agreed. There was an additional problem. Haldeman wanted pardons for everyone, Haig explained. There was a lot of pressure on the president to issue pardons before resigning. Pressure in the form of old loyalties. A simple signature on a piece of paper for old friends who had served so well. What would Goldwater advise? "I don't think that would be wise," Goldwater said, "but he has the power, and if that is the cost, so be it." Goldwater was willing to pay almost anything to get Richard Nixon out of office. It was about 2 p.m. when Haig arrived back at the White House. He went straight to the EOB office and briefed the president about Haldeman's request and his reasons, and Goldwater's reaction to it. Nixon wanted more time to think about it and asked Haig to consult the lawyers. As Haig left, he ran into Garment. "Lynn, walk along with me," he said. Garment fell into step. "I'm going to see Fred or Jim," Haig said, and asked if Garment knew where they were. Bazart was at the dentist, and St. Clair was in his favorite courtroom explaining that 9 of the 64 subpoenaed tapes didn't exist or couldn't be found, Garment said. Haig motioned Garment into St. Clair's empty office. The two men sat down. Garment thought Haig looked emaciated. The general was clutching his lighter and cigarette nervously in one hand. Things had to be brought to a conclusion, Haig said. The president was probably going to resign, and it was best that he go on his own steam. One final snag had developed. Haldeman was urging the president to grant pardons for everyone involved in Watergate. The pressure was tremendous, Haig said. He had briefed the president. He had promised him he would check it out with the lawyers. What was the legal judgment? Could the president do it? Totally out of the question, Garment said. It would be grotesque. Up to this point, he has, oddly enough, worked within the system, even though it is undoing him. Pardons would be outside the system. It would be saying to hell with the system, with justice. It would bring the roof down. Garment felt the heat increase in his body, his face. It would be the single most devastating thing that could be contemplated, he said. Goldwater found pardons tolerable, Haig said, if that was the price of resignation. The president wanted to know why, if Goldwater could stomach it, some of the staff couldn't. Is it conceivable, Haig asked again. Can it be done? Sure, Garment said. A president has the legal authority to grant pardons. But what would Watergate pardons include? Where did Watergate begin and other crimes stop? What do you do, empty the prisons? Why can't it be done, Haig insisted. Garment couldn't get the arguments out fast enough. The president might have the technical power, but he didn't have enough political strength to exercise it for old friends and aides. The president had to go out of office in presidential fashion. Imagine, Garment said, Nixon's last act being pardons for all his old cronies. That would ensure that Watergate could never be put into perspective. Haig said that the president felt that pardons would allow him to assume the entire burden of Watergate. He felt responsible for the plight of his old friends. All the guilt and responsibility and the public outrage falling on Nixon. Garment knew how that would appeal to him. They just couldn't let him do it, Garment told Haig. But as Haig got up and went across the hall to the washroom, Garment worried that he hadn't mustered all his arguments. Bazart and then St. Clair returned. Haig and Garment met them in Bazart's office. Bazart was also opposed. He had already taken steps to block any pardon requests that might come through the Justice Department, the normal route. Haig told them that he had been negative on the subject with the president and that he was supposed to be checking with the lawyers. Haldeman was really pushing and had tried to get through directly to the president, but Haig had intercepted the call. He was afraid that Haldeman would find a way to get through to Nixon. Haig's conversion now seemed complete. That criminal has asked for a pardon, he said. He expressed disbelief. The arrogance was incredible. It was blackmail. It had to be stopped. Bazart calmly offered to call Haldeman's chief attorney, John Wilson, and explain that pardons would be impossible. Well, said St. Clair at last, maybe pardons should be considered. It was worthwhile to explore the possibility before leaping to conclusions. Haig and Garment pounced on him. If the president grants this pardon, Garment said, he will be ensuring his own trial. He will be forcing it. The public has to have a head, and if the president takes the heads away, the public will have his. And that would be the monkey trial of all time. The president has to take his chances. St. Clair was soon persuaded that they should urge the president to reject the request. So we'll stop this session right there. We're in the middle of Wednesday, August 7th. And we'll continue at that point in our next session. The Final Days by Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein. Thanks for watching.